Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night Podcast. Story 1, The Light on the Swamp, The Bain Family Massacre. Hello and welcome. I am your resident horror storytelling expert. Tonight we cross the Pacific, heading to a peaceful land known as the Land of the Long White Cloud, New Zealand. Yet even amidst the most beautiful landscapes, the most devastating crimes can occur. This story is about the Bain family and a tragedy that can never be satisfactorily resolved. June 1994, the city of Dunedin was cold and damp. The Bain family lived in an ordinary house. Robin Bain, the father, was a teacher. Margaret Bain, the mother, was a homemaker. And 4 children, Arawa, Laniet, Stephen, and the eldest son, David. On the night of June 20th, their home became the scene of a horrific massacre. The next morning, David Bain, 22, who was on his morning paper round, called the police in a state of panic. He said he had just returned home and found his family members dead. Police discovered 5 bodies. Robin, Margaret, and 3 of the children, Arawa, 19, Laniet, 18, and Stephen, 14, were all shot dead. David, the eldest son, was the only survivor. He appeared distraught in public, and all he could mumble was, "They are dead. They are dead." Initially, the police focused on Robin Bain. The father had left a piece of paper with a note believed to be, "Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, this is my holiday." Investigators speculated that Robin, who was reportedly struggling with personal issues and possibly mental illness, had killed his entire family and then committed suicide. However, there were many inconsistencies. First, the rifle used by the family was found near David's bedroom. Second, and most importantly, the family computer was turned on the morning of the crime, after Robin was presumed dead. On the computer screen was a deleted message that was later recovered. "You are the only one who survives." This message was later proven to have been typed after the time Robin died. All suspicion began to shift toward David. The prosecution argued that David carried out the massacre to prevent his father from publicly exposing an embarrassing family secret, or out of greed related to the inheritance. David was charged with murder. The first trial ended with a guilty verdict. David Bain was sentenced to life in prison. New Zealand believed the case was solved. But this story did not end there. A decade later, David Bain's case was reviewed. A famous campaigner championed David's defense, believing he was a victim of police failure. After multiple appeals, David Bain was released and granted a retrial. The second trial in 2009 meticulously analyzed the forensic evidence, especially the blood spatter, fingerprints on the rifle, and the question of who typed the message on the computer. Crucially, defense experts demonstrated a high probability that Robin had committed suicide. The sweatshirt David wore that night was allegedly stained with Robin's blood, but experts presented various theories about the blood's origin, raising reasonable doubt. The jury was convinced that there was sufficient reasonable doubt as to whether David was the perpetrator. David Bain was declared not guilty and was released. However, the case never achieved clarity. To this day, the New Zealand public remains deeply divided over who truly pulled the trigger, David or Robin. The truth of that fateful night remains shrouded in the fog of the Dunedin swamp. Story 2, Gift from Hell, the Luca Magnotta case. Welcome back to episode 2. Tonight's story is one of the most horrifying examples of how technology and the thirst for fame can push an individual to the brink of unimaginable crime. we will delve into the sick mind of Luca Magnotta, the killer who turned his crime into an online spectacle. Before 2012, Luca Rocco Magnotta, born Eric Clinton Newman, was a failed, aspiring model obsessed with becoming an internet celebrity. Magnotta gained notoriety in online communities for gruesome videos of him torturing kittens. But that attention wasn't enough to satisfy him. He craved global fame, regardless of the price. Magnotta spent years cultivating an online persona, sowing chaos and spreading rumors about himself, attempting to create the image of a glamorous psychopath. The climax of this depravity occurred in May 2012 in Montreal, Canada. The victim was Lin Jun, 33, a Chinese engineering student at Concordia University who had recently moved to Montreal seeking a better life. Magnotta lured Lin Jun back to his apartment. What happened next was a crime beyond comprehension. Magnotta brutally murdered and dismembered Lin Jun. The horrifying detail is that he filmed the entire process, a video titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick," and uploaded it to various websites. The video explicitly detailed his inhuman acts. Not stopping there, Magnotta mailed Lin Jun's body parts to political offices in Ottawa, the Canadian Liberal and Conservative parties, and to a school in Vancouver. Days after the crime, a bloody parcel was delivered to the Conservative Party headquarters in Ottawa. When opened, it contained a severed human foot. The horror escalated as police confirmed it was a homicide. Magnotta, who had anticipated becoming a global fugitive, quickly fled Canada, traveling through France to Germany. The manhunt for Luca Magnotta became an international pursuit. His images and video spread across the world. Magnotta was finally apprehended at an internet cafe in Berlin, Germany, where he was reading news articles about his own case. His obsession with fame ultimately led to his downfall. Luca Magnotta's trial in Montreal in 2014 focused on the question of whether he was a premeditated killer or a person suffering from schizophrenia. The defense attempted to argue that Magnotta was not criminally responsible due to his mental condition. However, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that Magnotta meticulously planned his crime, including filming the act and mailing the body parts. Magnotta was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 25 years. The Luca Magnotta case is a chilling story of how personal pathology can be amplified by technology, turning crime into a gift from hell sent to the world. It stands as a warning about the dangerous intersection of the thirst for fame and moral decay in the digital age. Story 3. Revenge at the Dinner Party. The Jeremy Bamber Case. Welcome back to Episode 3. Tonight, we journey to the tranquil countryside of Essex, United Kingdom, to uncover a family crime that exposed the rot hidden beneath the facade of upper-class life. This is the story of Jeremy Bamber, the son who turned a beautiful farm into the scene of a bloody massacre with cold calculation. On the night of August 7, 1985, Essex police received an emergency call from 24-year-old Jeremy Bamber. He frantically claimed he had just received a call from his father, Neville Bamber, saying that his sister, Sheila Caffell, was going crazy with a gun at the White House farm. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrific sight. 5 members of the Bamber family were dead. Neville and June Bamber, the adoptive parents, his sister Sheila, and Jeremy's twin nephews, Nicholas and Daniel, both 6 years old. All were shot dead. Initially, police believed Jeremy's story. Sheila Caffell, a former model, had struggled with schizophrenia for years. The scenario painted was that Sheila suffered a psychotic episode, used the family's rifle to murder her parents and 2 sons, and then committed suicide. Jeremy Bamber was the sole survivor. He displayed apparent distress and cooperated with the police. He was set to inherit a multi-million-pound fortune from his wealthy family. However, detectives quickly realized something was amiss. First, the rifle was found next to Sheila, but the way she was holding the weapon was inconsistent with suicide. Second, investigators noted inconsistencies in Jeremy's account of receiving the phone call from his father. The most damning piece of evidence came from a crucial witness. Julie Mugford, Jeremy's ex-girlfriend, informed the police. She recounted a chilling conversation after the murders, in which Jeremy boasted to her about arranging everything to look like Sheila was the perpetrator. With Julie Mugford's testimony, the criminal scenario changed completely. Jeremy Bamber, the meticulously planning son, was the cold-blooded killer. He carried out the massacre to inherit his family's wealth sooner. On that fateful night, Jeremy drove to White House Farm. He murdered his parents, then killed his 2 sleeping nephews. Finally, he murdered his sister Sheila, placed the gun in her hands, and staged the scene to look like a murder-suicide perpetrated by a mentally ill person. Prosecutors pointed out a scratch mark on the ceiling, suggesting a struggle had occurred, which contradicted the suicide theory. They also discovered a silencer found later in the house that contained Sheila's blood and proved that it could not have been attached to the gun if Sheila had shot herself. The trial of Jeremy Bamber garnered widespread attention in the United Kingdom. The public was horrified by his cunning, by which he exploited his sister's mental illness to frame her. Bamber was convicted of 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, one of the few most severe sentences in the UK. The Jeremy Bamber case is a chilling reminder of bottomless greed and humanity's capacity for brutal manipulation. He destroyed not only the lives of his entire family, but also his sister's reputation, all for selfishness and a hunger for inheritance. Story 4. Murder on the tennis court. The Hans Reiser case. Welcome back to episode 4. Tonight we explore a crime that took place within the high-tech circles of California, where the intelligence of a computer programmer was weaponized for a near-perfect murder. This is the story of Hans Reiser and the disappearance of his wife, Nina. Hans Reiser, a well-known computer programmer in Oakland, California, was famous for creating the Reiser FS file system. His wife, Nina Reiser, was an immigrant doctor from Russia. Their marriage was a volatile union, and by 2006, they were embroiled in a bitter, drawn-out divorce and custody battle. Nina was last seen on September 3, 2006, when she dropped off their 2 children at Hans's house. She subsequently vanished without a trace. Hans Reiser claimed that Nina had abandoned the family and had likely flown back to Russia. However, Nina's friends and family knew she would never abandon her children. They reported her missing to the police. Police quickly investigated Hans Reiser, and he immediately became the prime suspect. Hans, who was highly intelligent, but also eccentric and prone to paranoia, was uncooperative with investigators. What made this case particularly chilling was the absence of a body. Detectives believed Nina was murdered, but without a body, there was no murder case. Investigators uncovered strong circumstantial evidence. They found Nina's blood in Hans's old minivan. Hans had tried to clean the vehicle with solvents and water, but forensic scientists still detected small droplets of blood. Another key piece of evidence was Hans's change in behavior and his mysterious trips. Detectives discovered Hans spent hours driving around desolate areas near regional parks. Hans's arrogance was also a crucial factor. He constantly believed he was smarter than the police, which only heightened suspicion. After months of investigation, Hans Reiser was arrested in 2007 and charged with Nina's murder. Despite having no body, the prosecutor was determined to proceed with a trial based on forensic evidence and behavior. The trial of Hans Reiser was a clash between forensic science and Hans's unwavering insistence on his innocence. However, before the jury could deliver a verdict in the initial trial, Hans Reiser did the unthinkable. Facing the possibility of a first-degree murder conviction and life without parole, Hans accepted a plea deal with the prosecutor. In exchange for reducing the charge to second-degree murder, Hans agreed to lead investigators to the location where he hid Nina's body. In September 2007, Hans Reiser kept his promise. He led police to a remote, hilly, and wooded area in Oakland. There, investigators found Nina Reiser's remains, buried near Hans's mother's home and not far from the old yard Hans frequently visited. He had concealed the body there for nearly a year, attempting to make the case a permanent mystery. Hans Reiser's staging of the crime and sophisticated concealment of the body is a terrifying testament to how intelligence can be used to commit the most brutal acts. Hans Reiser, who never expressed genuine remorse, was sentenced to life in prison. This case is a stark reminder that sometimes the silence of physical evidence is merely a cry for help waiting to be deciphered by those smarter than the perpetrator. Story 5. The Black Widow. The Belle Gunness Case. Welcome back to episode 5. Tonight we turn back the clock to the early 1900s to a remote farm in LaPorte, Indiana, USA. This is the story of a Norwegian immigrant woman who turned the American dream into a cold-blooded nightmare. Belle Gunness, the Black Widow. Belle Gunness, a physically large woman, nearly 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, was not only physically strong, but possessed a sharp intellect and shocking ruthlessness. After her first husband and 2 of her children died mysteriously, and Belle collected the insurance money, she moved to Indiana. There, Belle began using a particular tactic, placing marriage advertisements in newspapers across the United States, targeting single, wealthy, and naive men. Her ads were full of promises of love, fidelity, and a happy life on the farm. The advertisements were often simple. A well-to-do widow is looking for a sincere life partner. Lonely and trusting men arrived at Belle's farm with their money and assets. Initially, Belle would charm them and cook delicious meals, but before long, these men would vanish without a trace. Between 1900 and 1908, it is estimated that anywhere from 25 to 40 men came to Belle's farm and never left. Belle killed them in various ways, including poisoning their food and then bludgeoning or hacking them to death with an axe. After the murders, Belle dismembered their bodies and buried them on the farm, often feeding parts to her hogs or burying them beneath the hog pen in a lime pit. The case was only discovered in 1908. A fire broke out and consumed Belle's house. In the rubble, police found 4 charred bodies, 1 adult and 3 children. Everyone initially assumed it was Belle and her 3 remaining children. However, a man named Asle Helgelien, the brother of one of the missing victims, was suspicious. He believed his brother had gone to Belle's farm and never returned. Asle's persistence led the police to investigate further. They began digging in the garden in the hog pen area. What they found shocked the entire nation. First, the body of the adult female found in the rubble did not match Belle Gunness's size. Then, in the hog pen area, they found the dismembered remains of dozens of men. Human heads were missing, and torsos were chopped up. Belle Gunnis's farm was, in reality, a personal cemetery. Autopsy results later showed that the charred female body found in the house was not Belle Gunnis. It was another woman who had been decapitated and placed there, likely one of Belle's hired helps to fake Belle's death in the fire and escape justice. Belle Gunnis, the Black Widow, had vanished. She took her victims' money and assets, staged her own death, and escaped. Although there were numerous sightings and reports of her in the following years, Belle Gunnis was never caught. She became a chilling legend of female cruelty, a predator who used loneliness and the promise of love as bait for her insatiable greed. Story 6. The Garden of a Normal House. The Fred and Rosemary West Case. Welcome to Episode 6. Tonight, we will uncover the horrifying truth hidden behind the doors of a seemingly ordinary suburban home. This story is about Fred and Rosemary West, the couple who turned their residence at 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester, England, into the House of Horrors. Fred West, a builder, and Rosemary West, his younger wife, lived what appeared to be an ordinary life in Gloucester throughout the 1970s and 1980s. They had several children, and Fred worked odd jobs around the area. However, behind the facade of this normal, working-class family was a world of sexual crime, torture, and serial murder. Fred and Rose West collaborated in finding, luring, and abducting vulnerable young women, many of whom were runaways, drifters in the area, and most terrifyingly, their own daughters. Their crimes spanned decades, and the most chilling fact was that they buried their victims right within the premises of their home. The crimes of Fred and Rose were only exposed in 1994, nearly a quarter of a century after the disappearances began. Police launched an investigation after Fred's own daughter, Heather West, who went missing in 1987, was reported to have been murdered. Other daughters of Fred and Rose bravely spoke out about the horrific abuse they had endured inside the house. Police obtained a warrant to search 25 Cromwell Street. Fred, when questioned, suddenly admitted that Heather had been murdered and buried in the garden. That confession led to a massive excavation that locals dubbed the Garden of Horrors. What investigators found shocked the entire United Kingdom. Beneath the concrete and soil of the garden and under the floorboards of the house, police discovered the remains of at least 9 victims, including Heather West. All were young women. Fred West later confessed to a total of 12 murders. He described in detail how he and Rose had tortured, abused, and murdered the victims, then dismembered and buried them. The ghastly truth was that the victims, including both strangers and family members, had been interred just steps away from where they lived, ate, and slept. Fred West was charged with 12 counts of murder. However, before the trial could take place, Fred West committed suicide in prison in January 1995. Rosemary West was subsequently brought to trial. Prosecutors argued that Rose was not just an accomplice, but an active participant in the acts of abuse and murder. Rose vehemently maintained her innocence, placing all the blame on Fred. However, the evidence against Rose was overwhelming. She was convicted of 10 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. She is one of the very few women in the UK to receive such a severe sentence. The case of Fred and Rosemary West became a symbol of the terrifying reality that monstrous evil can lurk within the most ordinary houses, and that the indifference of neighbors and the community can allow brutality to persist for decades. Story 7. The Son's Testimony. the Phineas Paddock case. Welcome back to episode 7. Tonight we travel to Australia, the land of vast and mysterious territories, to uncover a family tragedy that occurred in the post-World War II era, a story of prolonged abuse and a horrific crime that was hidden for years. In the 1940s, in the remote areas of Queensland, Australia, the life of young Phineas Paddock was a long series of horrors. He lived with his biological mother, Vera Paddock, and his cruel stepfather, John Paddock. Phineas was one of 4 children. He, along with his siblings, endured severe physical and psychological abuse from both his mother and stepfather. However, the extreme cruelty was primarily directed at one of them, Phineas's younger brother, David. David Paddock was systematically abused and starved by his parents. The young boy lived in extreme fear and profound isolation. In 1947, tragedy struck. Following a prolonged period of abuse, young David Paddock died from exhaustion and beatings. To conceal the crime, Vera and John Paddock hastily and secretly buried David's body near a remote creek. Afterward, they told everyone that David had been sent to live with distant relatives. The family continued their lives, carrying that terrible secret. The abuse and violence persisted against Phineas and his other siblings, but the fear of David's fate kept them silent. Years passed. This case might have been buried forever, if not for the extraordinary courage of Phineas Paddock. After growing up and escaping his parents' control, Phineas struggled with the horrific memories of his childhood and his brother's fate. Despite being haunted and facing the fear of retribution from his stepfather, Phineas decided to do what no one in the community dared: speak the truth. In the 1960s, nearly 2 decades after David's death, Phineas went to the police and recounted the chilling tale of abuse, David's death, and the location where the boy's body was buried. Phineas's testimony led police to the remote creek area, and after extensive searches, the remains of young David Paddock were found, confirming Phineas's account. Vera and John Paddock were arrested and charged with murder. The trial sent shockwaves through Australia. The public was horrified to learn of the cruelty that had occurred behind closed doors. This event was a wake-up call about the issue of child abuse hidden within isolated communities. Although Vera and John attempted to deny and blame each other, Phineas's brave and detailed testimony, along with the skeletal evidence, was irrefutable. Both Vera and John Paddock were convicted and sentenced to prison for the crimes against David. This punishment finally brought justice for young David Paddock. But the event also exposed the failure of society to protect the most vulnerable. The Phineas Paddock case is not just a story of crime, but a story of healing and the power of truth. Story 8. The Fateful Hand. The Helly Crafts Case. Welcome back to episode 8. Tonight we return to the U.S., focusing on a uniquely gruesome crime and the pioneering role of forensic science in bringing about justice. Helly Crafts was a Danish flight attendant, and Richard Crafts, her husband, was a commercial airline pilot. The couple lived a seemingly affluent life in Newtown, Connecticut. However, beneath that perfect facade lay a marriage fraught with violence and infidelity. Helly knew Richard was a philanderer and was preparing to file for divorce. She had hired a private investigator to track him. On the night of November 19, 1986, Helly Crafts suddenly vanished. Richard told relatives and friends that Helly had abruptly left to visit her mother in Denmark or travel to the Canary Islands. Richard appeared suspiciously calm. Helly's friends, knowing she would never abandon her 3 children, did not believe Richard's story. They reported her missing to the police and quickly pointed to Richard as the main suspect. Police noted that Richard provided an odd explanation for purchasing a large freezer and spending an unusual amount of time working on his property shortly after Hella disappeared. Richard had also purchased a commercial wood chipper a few days prior. What further raised detective suspicions was the fact that Richard had borrowed a chainsaw from a neighbor on the night Hella disappeared. They also discovered that Richard had meticulously cleaned his rented truck. However, there was still no body. Richard insisted Hella had run away, and police had no direct evidence of a murder. The case appeared stalled until investigators began relying heavily on forensic science. A detective received a tip that Richard had spent an entire night on a bridge over the Housatonic River, operating a noisy machine. Police searched the bridge area, where Richard was suspected of disposing of the body. What they found was minute. A single strand of blonde hair, a tiny piece of bone, a tooth with dental work, and a few human fingernail fragments. Forensic scientists did something unprecedented. They used advanced technology to analyze these small fragments. The blonde hair matched Helly. The tooth matched Helly's dental records. They even found a tiny bone fragment that, through DNA analysis, was confirmed to be Helly's. This was the smoking gun. Richard Crafts had killed Helly, frozen her body, and then used the wood chipper to dispose of the remains, scattering the pieces into the lake and river. He thought he had committed the perfect crime, but failed due to the smallest pieces of evidence. Richard Crafts was arrested and tried for murder. The Helly Crafts case became famous because it was the first time in Connecticut a person was convicted of murder without a complete victim's body ever being found. In court, the prosecutor presented a clear and chilling narrative of abuse, betrayal, and evidence destruction. The forensic evidence, dubbed the wood chipper case, was undeniable. Richard Crafts was convicted of murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. This case is not just a story of domestic crime, but a turning point in forensic science, proving that any killer who attempts to destroy evidence, no matter how sophisticated, will leave fragments that tell the victim's story. Story 9. The Predator on the Desolate Road. The Highway of Tears case. Welcome back to episode 9. Tonight we travel along Highway 16 in British Columbia, Canada. A road that stretches over 700 kilometers through dense forests and sparsely populated communities. This is the road with the chilling nickname, the Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is the name given to a series of disappearances and murders of women, primarily indigenous women, that have occurred along Highway 16 since the 1960s. Although the official number of confirmed victims by police is 18, advocacy groups and indigenous communities believe the true toll could be as high as 40. The victims were often young girls hitchhiking between remote towns or women walking along the road. These cases share a chilling commonality. The victims were abducted, sexually assaulted, and then killed. Their bodies often found discarded in the forests near the route. For decades, the disappearances continued, but the public attention and police resources allocated to these cases were severely limited, particularly during the 1970s and 1980s. Indigenous communities spoke out about this lack of concern. They argued that had the victims been upper-class white women, the governmental response would have been vastly different. The geographical isolation, compounded by systemic racism and societal neglect, made these women perfect targets for predators. The unsettling realization is that while police believe several different killers may be responsible for the crimes, there is a lingering suspicion that at least one dedicated serial killer operated along this route for many years. It wasn't until the early 21st century, as public pressure and renewed investigations mounted, that police began to apply modern forensic techniques. In 2012, a major breakthrough occurred. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, announced that they had used DNA evidence to link one of the Highway of Tears cases, the 1978 murder of teenager Monica Jack, to a deceased serial killer, Gary Taylor Handlin. However, Handlin was only charged with one of the cases. The complex investigation also led to another name, Cody Legebokoff, a local serial killer who was convicted of 4 separate murders in British Columbia, though these were not officially linked to the original Highway of Tears list. The Highway of Tears case is not just a story of serial crime, but a narrative about societal failure and the struggle of Canada's Indigenous communities to achieve justice for their loved ones. While some cases have been solved or have identified suspects, the vast majority of the disappearances and murders remain unsolved. The highway remains lined with fading photos of victims, representing families still waiting for the truth. The predator on the desolate road might be one, or might be many, but the fear and loss they caused are a wound that never heals in the history of Canadian crime. Story 10. The Devious Guest. The Shinbashi Family Massacre. Welcome to episode 10, the final installment of this series. Tonight, we travel to Tokyo, Japan, a nation known for its culture of discipline and respect, to uncover a family crime that shocked the country. This story is about the simmering envy that turned a friend into a murderer. In 1989, the Shimbashi family lived in the Fukuoka prefecture area, but their story was brought into the national spotlight. This family was the epitome of middle-class success. The father was a successful manager, the mother a diligent homemaker, and they had 2 intelligent, well-behaved young children. The killer was Masato, an old friend and neighbor of the Shinbashi family. Masato had a more difficult life, and envy began to gnaw at his soul as he witnessed his friend's wealth and happiness. This envy turned into hatred as Masato felt disrespected by Shinbashi. He believed his friend was benefiting from good fortune that he himself was denied. On a night in March 1989, Masato carried out his wicked plan. He arrived at the Shinbashi home as a friend, a trustworthy guest. Once welcomed inside, Masato launched his attack. He brutally murdered all 4 family members, the father, the mother, and their 2 small children. The massacre was carried out quickly and savagely, using a sharp weapon. After committing the crime, Masato attempted to stage the scene as a robbery homicide, taking some valuable items and cash to mislead the investigation. He then calmly left the scene and returned to his normal life, playing the role of a friend sharing grief with others in the community. Initially, the police focused on the possibility of a brutal robbery. However, Japanese detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies. The stolen items appeared to be randomly selected, which was inconsistent with the behavior of professional robbers. Furthermore, friends and colleagues of the Shinbashi family soon pointed out Masato's erratic behavior. During the investigation, police uncovered the financial troubles and long-standing envy that Masato harbored toward the Shinbashi family. Finally, Masato was arrested. When questioned, he confessed to the entire crime. His chilling confession revealed that the main motive was not money, but envy and a sense of social betrayal. He wanted to destroy the happiness he believed Shinbashi did not deserve. The trial of Masato sent profound shockwaves through Japanese society. It raised questions about social pressure and the hidden envy within a culture that emphasizes conformity and success. Masato was convicted of mass murder and sentenced to death. The Shinbashi family massacre case is a gruesome warning that the greatest threats to a family do not always come from the outside. Sometimes the devious guest is the friend we trust the most, one who allowed envy to turn into total destruction. This crime stands as a tragedy of personal betrayal, a dark stain on the history of Japanese crime.